My cheating wife left with the kids for her lover's mansion. My daughter young and bragging about her new daddy. My wife was shocked and didn't expect this. Hello Reddit I plus here. I was 29 the year everything began unraveling. On paper, I had it all together. My career in logistics was on an upward climb. I was running 5 days a week, benching more than I had in college, and most weekends were reserved for grilling steaks with friends or hosting poker nights in my little backyard. I wasn't searching for anything when I met Danielle. It was at a neighborhood barbecue, one of those gatherings where everyone drags out lawn chairs and coolers. She was across the yard in a sundress, standing near the ice chest, laughing in a way that cut straight through the dull roar of small talk. It wasn't a polite laugh, the kind people fake at cookouts. No, it was bright, unguarded, like she was letting the world in on a private joke. I muttered something dumb about how the burgers looked like burnt hockey pucks. She threw her head back and laughed as if I was the funniest man alive. Right there, I felt a spark. We started talking. Talking turned into long drives at night, parked by the water, making plans like two people who had known each other forever. By 8 months, we were married. People told us we were rushing. Maybe they were right. But at the time, it felt unstoppable, like a current sweeping us both forward. When our son Julian was born a year later, everything shifted. I still remember that night in the delivery room, holding him for the first time, his tiny fist wrapped around my finger, and I swore silently that I'd never let him down. Fatherhood hit me like a freight train, hard, overwhelming, but thrilling. Those first months, I put in the hours. Danielle would collapse from exhaustion, and I'd take over, walking the living room floor at 2 a.m., humming nonsense songs until Julian's cries softened. The first time he fell asleep against my chest, I didn't move a muscle for fear of breaking the spell. That's what meaning felt like. 2 years later, our daughter Aria arrived, but by then, Danielle was changing. She grew distant, less warmth, more sharp edges. She'd scroll her phone late into the night, screen turned away. At first, I thought it was stress. Postpartum depression, maybe. I tried everything. Flowers on random Tuesdays, cooking her favorite meals, booking a sitter so we could have nights out. One night, I took her to the restaurant where we'd had our first date. I even saved up for a necklace she'd once admired. She looked at it, sighed, and said, "Can we just go home? I'm tired." Her phone never left her hand that night. That's when I knew something was wrong. The late-night texting, the secretive smiles, her taking calls from work outside in the driveway. And then came the moment I'll never forget. She left her phone on the counter while showering. A notification flashed. A message preview. "Miss you too. Can't wait to see you again." From someone named Paul. My stomach dropped. I didn't explode. I just froze. For days I watched, piecing together the truth I didn't want to admit. Then, one Friday evening, I came home to find divorce papers on the table. No warning. Just a single sheet of paper and Danielle standing there, arms crossed. "You didn't want to open our marriage," she said flatly. "So I'm taking the kids and moving in with Paul." I felt my chest hollow out. Julian, just 4 years old, looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes and said, "Daddy, Mommy says we don't need you anymore." My new daddy promised me a car for my 16th birthday, and we're moving to his big mansion in Beverly Hills. It felt like the world collapsed in on itself, but I swallowed every word I wanted to scream. Instead, I looked Danielle in the eye and said, quietly but firmly, "I'm their father, not your ATM." We split custody evenly. Neither of us paid child support since we both worked, but the emotional cost, that was another story. The first night in my tiny apartment was brutal. Nothing but a mattress, a hand-me-down TV, and silence. I sat scrolling through pictures of Julian and Aria until my phone died. Then I just sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had detonated so quickly. Being a single dad was chaos. Packing diaper bags while half asleep, calling my mom at 2 a.m. when Aria spiked a fever, panicking when Julian cried for his toys that were at Mommy's house. But over time, I adapted. The kids adjusted too. Dad's house became more than a stopover. It became a second home. And then came Paul. He strutted into the picture like he'd been rehearsing for the role of super dad. Danielle married him within a year. Suddenly, my kids had a new stepsister, Maya, and eventually a half-brother, Owen. I met Paul at a preschool drop-off. He smirked, stuck out his hand and said, "Oh, you must be the ex. Heard a lot about you." I gripped his hand firmly. "Funny, haven't heard much about you." He laughed too hard, like he'd scored a point. Over time, he started calling Julian and Aria our kids. To teachers, to other parents. Every time, I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. One evening at dinner, Julian casually said, "Daddy Paul's gonna teach me to ride a bike." I set my fork down. "Who's Daddy Paul?" "Mom says I should call him that. It's polite." I forced a smile. "Buddy, you know I'm your dad, right? You don't need to call anyone else that." He shrugged. "Mom says I have to." That night, I texted Danielle, I don't want Julian calling Paul Dad. Her reply, it was Julian's choice. Don't make this a thing. I knew it wasn't his choice. But what could I do? Telling my son who not to call Dad would only hurt him more, so I swallowed it. Again. The years rolled on. Paul loved to needle me with digs about money. At a parent-teacher night, he leaned in and said, "Must be nice only having to provide for 2 kids. Some of us know what real sacrifice looks like in a blended family." He flashed a watch that probably cost more than my car. I bit my tongue for the kids' sake. But my patience snapped when Julian and Aria earned their place at Tech Scholars Camp, a national program for gifted students. Only 40 kids in the entire country got in. Both of mine made it. The cost? Nearly $20,000 total, but I'd been saving for years. I didn't hesitate. When I told Danielle, expecting at least a little pride, she said, "You know, Maya's been showing interest in robotics too. Wouldn't it be unfair if she couldn't go?" I blinked. "You're not asking me to," she smiled sweetly. "You're already paying for 2. What's one more? If you really cared about the whole family, you'd cover her as well." For the first time in years, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was beyond belief. "Danielle," I said, standing to leave, "my kids earned this. Yours didn't. I'm not funding your new husband's family." That was the moment the illusion shattered. They thought I'd fold, that I'd bankroll their dream life, just to keep the peace. But what they didn't realize was simple. The future they promised my kids. Cars, mansions, luxuries. None of that came from Paul. It was all on me, and I wasn't their ATM. Danielle's face tightened when I told her no. She didn't explode right away. She just sat there, lips pressed thin, staring at me like she was calculating her next move. A week later, I found out what that move was. I showed up for my usual custody pickup at her house. Julian and Aria ran to the car, backpacks slung over their shoulders, excitement bubbling out of them. But Danielle trailed behind, arms folded. Before I could pull away, she leaned in through the passenger window and said, "Just so you know, Paul and I are talking to a lawyer. This back-and-forth custody schedule isn't healthy for the kids. They need stability, a single home base." I gripped the wheel. "And I'm guessing that home base is yours?" She gave me a look that said, "You know the answer. Think about it. Paul's here full-time. I work from home now. Meanwhile, you're stretched thin. It's not about punishing you. It's about what's best for them." I forced myself to keep my voice calm. What's best for them is having both parents. I'm not a visitor in my kids' lives. Julian leaned forward from the back seat. "Dad, can we go now?" I nodded, started the car, and drove off. But inside, I was boiling. That weekend, Julian dropped a bomb. We were eating pancakes at my place when he said, "Daddy, Paul told Mom that you're selfish, that you only care about Julian and Aria, not the whole family." I nearly dropped my fork. "What do you mean?" Julian poked at his plate. "He said it's not fair you don't do stuff for Maya. He said if you really cared, you'd help." Then Mom told him not to say that in front of me. I took a deep breath, trying not to let my anger show. "Buddy, listen to me. I love you and your sister more than anything. That will never change. But you're not responsible for what adults say. You never have to choose between us, okay?" He nodded slowly, relief washing over his face. "Okay, Dad." That moment hardened something in me. If Paul and Danielle wanted a war, fine. But I wasn't going to let them poison my kids against me. The lawyer letter came 2 weeks later. A formal request to review custody, arguing the kids needed a primary home with Danielle and Paul. I didn't panic. I called my attorney, handed him the letter, and said, "Get ready. They're about to learn I'm not playing games. Court hearings are never pretty." Danielle sat across the table acting wounded. Paul smirked like the outcome was already his. Her lawyer argued stability. Mine argued evidence. Every text, every email, every receipt showing I was just as present, if not more, than Danielle. When Paul tried to chime in about how he'd been stepping up as a father figure, the judge cut him off. "Sir, you are not a legal parent in this case. Sit down." The smirk slid right off his face. In the end, custody remained joint. The judge even warned Danielle against undermining my role as their father. Walking out of that courtroom, I caught Paul's glare. He looked like a man who just bet big and lost. That summer, Julian and Aria went to Tech Scholars Camp. I'll never forget dropping them off at the airport. New laptops in their backpacks, grins stretched ear to ear. Aria hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Julian whispered, "Thanks, Dad. This means everything." When they came back 6 weeks later, they weren't the same kids. They were sharper, more confident, glowing with pride. Julian couldn't stop talking about the coding projects he built. Aria showed me videos of her robot competing against others. Danielle tried to act excited, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Paul didn't even bother pretending. He just made a snide comment about all that money for nerd camp. But something shifted after that summer. The kids started seeing through the cracks. One night, Julian told me, "Dad, Paul promised me a new bike. but then he said he couldn't because money's tight. But you never promise things you can't do. That hit me like a thunderbolt. Because it was true. I never tried to buy their love. I just gave them consistency. The unraveling of Danielle and Paul's mansion life came slowly. Then, all at once, Paul's business, his so-called marketing consultancy, was tanking. Rumors spread he'd been cut out of a big contract. They downsized from the Beverly Hills mansion to a smaller house in the valley. The luxury cars disappeared, traded for more modest ones. Danielle tried to spin it to the kids. We're just simplifying life. Less is more. But kids notice. They notice when promises turn hollow. Julian started spending more time at my place, asking if he could stay an extra night here and there. Aria once whispered, "Daddy, it's calmer here." That's when I realized I didn't need to compete with Paul's flash. All I had to do was keep showing up, and slowly, steadily, my kids saw the truth for themselves. The irony? The very night Danielle thought she was trading up, packing her bags, declaring she was moving on to something better, was the night she locked herself and the kids into a life that would crumble under its own weight. And me? I stayed the course. Their father. Not an ATM. Not a part-time visitor. Just steady, reliable, unshakable. And in the end, that mattered more than any mansion or shiny car ever could. As the years passed, Paul and Danielle's picture-perfect life kept cracking. The mansion was gone, the cars downgraded, and the promises of new bikes, or cars at 16, never came true. Julian and Aria noticed. They saw that at my house things were steady, maybe not flashy, but consistent. Dinner at the table, help with homework, a dad who kept his word. By the time Julian turned 14, he asked if he could stay with me full-time. Aria followed a year later. Danielle tried to fight it, but the kids were old enough for the court to hear their wishes. They chose stability over empty promises. Paul eventually disappeared from the picture. Danielle stayed bitter. But by then, it didn't matter, because my kids finally saw what I'd known all along. I wasn't just the ex or the ATM. I was their father. And in the end, that was enough.